Stefi, thank you so much for coming on the AIM podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited. I know you're busy, you have a lot going on, but for you to make the time to do this means a lot to me, and I'm sure the listeners are going to get a ton from this, as you were someone that I look to as an incredibly strong human being, not only physically but also mentally. And I really want to break that down in today's show because I think what you've been able to accomplish throughout your life has been incredible, but I really want to unpack the mental side of your success and maybe even some of the low parts of your life, whatever you choose to share there, but just how you've been able to build such a strong foundation up to this point. I know you're still building, so really excited for this episode.
For sure.
I think, one of the cool things I'd like to dive into, obviously doing some research, you come from a sports background, you played soccer, but even before that, like, have you always been a high achiever, even from a young age? Like, where did this kind of start, this desire to achieve and succeed for you?
I mean, at least in sports, yeah, it's always been that way. I've ever since I can remember. I started playing soccer when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My father, he actually used to play for the national team in France, where he's from. So kind of the passion for sports was ignited in me at a very young age, and I had a great role model and great encouragement from my dad and from my brothers as well. um so at least in sports, yeah, like I remember being 8 years old or 9 years old, and it was one of the first times that I ever visited the States, and I went to like a Foot Locker or something like that, one of the big, I don't know, a sports store, and I was trying on some soccer cleats, and I remember looking at myself in the mirror with the soccer cleats, and I told my dad, I'm like, I'm gonna be the best soccer player in the world. Like it was just something that it was just kind of my dream since from the time that I was a young kid. But I couldn't say that it was the same in every other area of my life, at least not at that point. I was an average student at best. I passed my classes with like B minuses kind of thing. It wasn't ever something that I even thought that it wasn't something that really, really mattered to me. Obviously, as I matured and got older, I started realizing the importance of education and the importance of having a career and the importance of developing your brain and your business sense, of course, because I do have a standard of living or I had a standard of living that I wanted to be able to provide for myself. So, but that didn't come until I was mature and much older.
Totally. I'm sure it didn't hurt to have a dad that played professional sports. I'm sure the exposure to the way maybe he approached his career and what he did obviously just kind of opened up your eyes to maybe even more possibilities. And obviously having that great relationship and support from him, I'm sure was super just important in your early stages as you kind of got off the ground with your own kind of goals and aspirations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was mainly in the form of, one of the things that I did learn from a young age was just to embrace the suck. I remember coming back home from constantly being benched. I wasn't good, when I started playing soccer. It's not like I was born with a talent of amazing footwork and amazing endurance or anything like that. I feel like really had to dig deep and work really hard to earn my stripes in the sport, to earn my place in the team, to kind of like climb the rankings. I was pretty like unnoticed for a long time at the beginning of my soccer career. It took me about 5 or 6 years to like start getting some level of like notoriety from my teammates and from my coaches and my trainers and such. So that's one of the things that I'm so grateful to have had my dad next to me, just pushing me even when things sucked. And I think the thing that always kept me going, at least back then, was how much I enjoyed the game. And I've taken that with me in so many other areas of my life as I've gotten older. Like I remember those times and how I was just so focused on the moment, right? On the game, on playing, on having fun, on sharing with my teammates, on sharing with my dad, without thinking at all about any sort of performance metrics. And I think that especially now with technology and how overly focused people have become and dependent on this data and this technology, that it's taken away the fun from the game, the fun from being a beginner, the fun from learning a new task, the fun from sucking and having to work really hard, right? And so I always keep that, as a reminder in the back of my head, especially now that I, just picked up another sport at 29 years old. Um, it's easy to get caught in the rat race of like, oh, I want to be, you have an expectation for where you want to be and at what points in time, and those are really dangerous. That's a really dangerous place to be, because things don't always work out the way you want them, right? And more often than not, you're not going to hit those performance markers at the times that you're expecting. Like, we're complex biological beings. It doesn't matter how incredible, if you have the best coaches in the world, it doesn't matter if you have the best work ethic. Some things just take time and take experience, to develop, especially now in boxing, right? Like, I have an incredible team. Like, I can't even, oh my God, I'm so lucky to have the connections I have and the team that I have around me. But ultimately, what I need is time. And I have so much experience with that, right? I have experience being the worst at something and having to just, I guess, persevere and keep showing up even when I'm absolutely getting beat up. And but now in boxing is like, it's the best analogy, because I'm actually getting beat up. you know I
Yeah.
go spar. I'm sparring these girls that have like 10 years experience over me, right? And I'm just walking around with two black guys at any point in time, like for the entirety of the camp. And one thing, actually my new trainer brought it up. He was like, I'm after my fight, he's like, I'm just really shocked that you keep showing up. He's
Mm.
like, because he's a very smart guy, and so he tests us, right? Like, one day he had me do 12 rounds with a guy. So it's like these little tests that, for me, I mean, I can see through him. I know what he's trying to do. But for me, it doesn't even phase me, right? Like, I just know that it's part of the process, and I'm just so grateful to be able to be an athlete. I've been there's been points in time in my career where I've been on the verge of having to let go of my identity as an athlete. And it's such a dread feeling for me. Like, seriously, it makes me tear up. Like, I cannot imagine my life without sports, or without being able to test my body physically. And so every
Wow.
day that I'm able to push my body to the absolute limit is a privilege. I'm so grateful. Like, sometimes when we go on these like long runs on the mountain, like an incline like this at 6 in the morning, and I hear the boys complaining. They're like, "Oh fuck, this is so hard." I'm like, "Dude, we get to do this shit. Like, do you realize
Wow.
how lucky you are? Like, it's unbelievable." And in my head, it's like, I'm bummed, because that is, in my head, is one less run that I'll be able to do. It's
Wow.
like I'm just like chipping away. It's one less run, one less day that I have to live as an athlete.
That is unbelievable. I love the way you tie into the perspective there, because I think a lot of times you just said so many good things. I really do want to unpack that, because the first thing you said that kind of just really sparked something in me is this idea of just having fun as a beginner. It's like a lot of things, a lot of times I think it gets way overlooked. It's like with social media, with different things, it's so easy to compare yourself to other people and where other people are. Everyone's on their own journey, everyone's on their own path. And if you lose sight in those stages, those early stages of you being a beginner, that's what allows you to become the success that, if you stick with it, you'll become. Like, those are important stages. And to the way you summed it up there too, just the perspective there of like not losing sight of those moments, why they might not be enjoyable, why they might suck, are going to play a role in the person you're going to become. And so by you not treating it with the respect and with the gratitude, like, you're missing so much. And I think you
Mhm.
just said it perfectly. I think that's something people need to really think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, I also think about it like, have you ever been in the ocean, like been cut in a wave and like gotten desperate underwater?
Totally.
That's it's the equivalent of like wanting results right now. You're
Mm.
not gonna get them. There's nothing that you can do to speed up the process. You just have to embrace the suck and have to embrace the moment in time that you are, and just keep going. I think that the reason why a lot of people fail at the goals that they set for themselves is because they fail to appreciate those early stages, and also fail to stick with things for long enough. Like,
Mm.
some things, just because it took somebody else a year to accomplish something, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same for you. and I came to terms with that a long time ago. For me, it was in school. Like I came to terms with the fact that I'm a slow learner. I need to, whatever takes somebody else an hour to memorize, it'll take me three. And at the beginning, I felt like it was so unfair. I felt like a failure. I considered dropping out of school so many times because it was so difficult for me to grasp seemingly simple concepts or to memorize seemingly simple things. And eventually it was just like, there's nothing wrong with like having to work a little bit extra hard. Maybe I have a learning disability. Maybe I have ADHD. I don't know. I didn't even want to know, right? I just knew that my learning process was different and it occurred at a different speed. And it's exactly the same for sports. The skill of strength. It took me 6 months to deadlift 400 pounds. I was blessed. I was blessed with the genetics to get strong really fast. But somebody else might spend 5 years trying to get a 400-pound deadlift, but they'll eventually get it. It's the point I'm trying to make. Like it took me 6 months. It'll take you 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. If you stick with it, you'll get it.
Totally. And I think not in every case, but I do think there's a lot of times where sometimes the thing that you're struggling with or the thing that you feel like is your downfall can end up being your superpower. It can end up being the thing that separates you and becomes a catalyst in your character and what you're going to build your personal foundation on. And I think people can't lose sight of that again. It just comes back to this idea of when you're constantly comparing yourself, you're going to miss the gifts and the things that you have. And maybe in the moment you feel like it's not a gift, but it can honestly become one if you treat it with the right respect.
100%. 100%.
I want to talk to you about what that transition looked like initially from, an athletic soccer background to going into powerlifting, which is obviously, I know there are similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. What was that kind of initial draw for you personally to get you into that sport? And what did that kind of look like getting off the ground and having so much success early on, like you mentioned?
So I stopped playing soccer when I was around 20. I came to America on a soccer scholarship when I was 18, initially to play Division 1 soccer at San Diego State. And I was so overwhelmed. This is one of my biggest regrets in life, by the way. It's to quit prematurely is one mistake that I'll probably never make again. Because look, and this is just a side note there, and I wanted to reiterate this because I did just say that if you stick with things for long enough, then you'll get it. But there's the other side of the coin, which is also knowing when to quit, right? Because there are some things that you might not be able to achieve just based on your skills and talents, right? Just based on the tools that you were naturally given. And there is no harm and there's no shame in deciding that is enough, right? Perfect example I can give you is, dude, Muhammad Ali. Like Muhammad Ali should have retired after he beat George Foreman. That was his call. And he kept going and look where he took him, It didn't
Yeah.
take him in the right direction. He ended up getting really sick because of it. So there are instances in which quitting is probably the best decision, but that's called informed quitting.
Mm.
And it's different to what happened to me, which was like I moved countries. I was experiencing just just all of these overwhelming emotions related to moving from one country to another, not having your support system, your family, your friends, even recognition. I came from Venezuela where like my name wasn't on newspapers for being such an accomplished soccer player to a place where nobody knows who I am, right? So it was just a combination of so many things, and that coupled with just immaturity is what led me to quit. And it wasn't the right time to quit. I definitely had more fight in me, and I definitely had the skill and talent to get better and potentially get to the top of that career as well. But I ended up moving to Miami, looking for just a more familiar atmosphere, a more familiar place to be in. Miami is really similar to South America. There's a lot of Venezuelans. It's really close to home as well, so it'd be easier for my family to visit me. So I ended up moving here, and I thought that I was ready to not be an athlete anymore. I thought that I'd played my whole life. I did what I did. It didn't work out, and now I was gonna just focus on school. And I mean, I got so depressed and so lost, and it was just one of the worst times of my life because I just felt like I didn't have the thing that brought the most meaning to my life, which was sports. So that's when I kind of entered this discovery phase of trying to figure out what else I could do, right? But it's not just doing a sport for the sake of doing a sport. Like I don't do anything in my life without purpose and intention. So for me, it was like, all right, like let me try to evaluate what my skills are. So what are the things that I can potentially develop and get better at? What are my talents? So what are my God-given gifts? You know, what was I born with with an aptitude for? And then what am I passionate about? Like what is something that maybe I would love to do or something that I could potentially develop a passion for? Like those were kind of my three buckets. So I started trying out different things, different sports. I bought a skateboard. I tried skateboarding. I tried Muay Thai for a bit. I tried half marathons. I bought a bike. I tried triathlons. And eventually I landed in CrossFit. I went to school with Noah Olsen. He's a CrossFit Games athlete. And I saw him on campus. I saw him on one of my classes and he was so jacked and so cool. And so I asked him, I was like, what do you do? Like, how do you, what did you do to look like that? And he's like, oh, CrossFit. And it was at the beginning stages of CrossFit. And once I started looking into it, I was like, man, maybe I could go to the CrossFit Games, right? Like, that'd be pretty cool. So I started going to the same gym as him to Peak 360 was just a couple of miles away from campus. And I absolutely fell in love with the sport because it was every workout was for the purpose of competing against other people, right? Like there's leaderboards and everybody's encouraging you. And then you have a coach that's teaching you new skills, that's teaching you how to do things. There's a strategy, there's times, there's points, you know, and it just gave me it gave me the structure in my life that I was needing. You know, that sports gives me. It gives me just like a schedule and it gives me the responsibility to eat right and to hydrate and to show up on time and to push myself and push my body, right? So CrossFit was that thing for me, at least at the beginning. And the what I was the worst at was strength. Strength was my biggest weakness. And I was like, okay, I definitely need to spend more time doing the Olympic lifts, need to get my snatch better, my clean and jerk, definitely my back squat, my deadlift, my bench, just my general strength markers needed to get better. And so I started just spending a ton more time on that. And next thing you know, I transitioned out of the metcons, out of the workout of the day, and I was just spending all of my time in the weight room, just kind of perfecting my craft. And that's how my first Olympic weightlifting coach found me. His name's Camilo. He used to be a coach for the Olympic team in Cuba and for the Olympic team in Venezuela as well. And he kind of took me under his wing. One of the first times he saw me, he just went, "Hey, do you want to go to the Olympics?" And I'm like, "Fuck yeah." In what? In what? Like, I don't really care what sport. If you think I'm good at something and you wanna coach me, let's go. Like, it doesn't matter the sport, fencing, freaking archery, like I don't care. Let's do it. So that's how I got into it. And I did Olympic weightlifting for about 5 years, really seriously. Like, you know, I after graduating college, I decided to stay here in Miami instead of going back home, or not back home, but my family moved to Chicago. But going to Chicago with my family just because my trainer was here, I was taking it really seriously. And I got into graduate school to get my doctorate degree. And if you know anybody who has gone through PT school, it's really tough. It really is. It's extremely stressful and extremely demanding and extremely time consuming. So training at the level that I needed to be training at for the purpose of potentially making an Olympic team or potentially like winning nationals or something like that was unrealistic. And not only was it unrealistic, but it was stupid and dangerous. Like I'm throwing weight over my head on 3 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's probably not the best idea. So in my head, I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna put Olympic weightlifting on the passenger seat for the next 3 years while I graduate. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna develop my general strength as much as possible, and then I'll come back to it. You know, I'll keep my mobility. I'll do the lifts just for technique, maybe once a week, but I'll just focus on getting as strong as humanly possible for this next 3 years. And that's how I got into powerlifting, and that's how Hybrid was born, the business that I started in during grad school as well. So it's just kind of like one thing always led to the other, and it followed a very kind of nice and natural flow.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's so cool. And then obviously, you're very humble, but you getting into powerlifting, I mean, you've had tremendous success. Honestly, broken probably more records than anyone else. I mean, you've got 25 world records, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. You've even, I mean, some of the records you've even broken, I think, turned heads where it's like, is this even humanly possible? And then you went and accomplished this goal. Like, what is your take on, I guess, this idea of like mental and physical limits that people kind of impose? Because I think a lot of the things that you've done have created people to rethink the way that our body can perform from a strength perspective.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing with really any world record that is ever broken, right? It always seems impossible until it's done, kind of thing. And just based on my exponential progress at the gym, I just never had any sort of doubt that I could do the things I wanted to do, right? Like I just knew based on how fast I was able to progress and how much improvement I was able to get from a technical perspective and so on. So I mean, obviously it'd be pretty hypocritical of me to say that the comments never got to me, because obviously at the beginning more than any other time they did. It was all so new to me. I started getting a lot of attention, and with that attention also came a lot of judgment and criticism about everything, right? About how I was doing things, why I was doing things, the way it's changing my body, the way I look, well, because I'm a girl, because this, because that. So at the beginning it was pretty rough. Like I did suffer a lot from reading a lot of these just kind of like negative comments, but over time, humans are amazing in that we adapt to anything. And so I adapted to that too, and I was able to grow a pretty thick and resilient skin against all of these negative comments and people, and just put my head down and continue working in the direction of my dreams and continue doing the things that I knew I could.
What do you think? Obviously, I'm sure there's multiple things you could share here. What do you think went into that successful equation? Do you think it was mostly just hard work and consistency? Like, was there a degree of your mindset that your mentality kind of took you to the edge? Do you think there was an education piece? Like, what were some of the things that you kind of experienced along your journey to acquire that success?
Hmm. It's a really good question. I mean, off the top of my head, I would say one, the fact that I'm committed to a lifelong learning. I'm committed to being a student forever. And so even getting into the sport, I've even been in the sport for many years, for 3, 4 years, I always approached it with the utmost form of humility. I would purposefully travel all over the states, all over the world, and train with other people who have seen a lot of success. And I would ask so many questions. I would tell them to take me through their workouts. I would tell them to explain to me how they periodized their training and why they did what they did. And so I kind of like morphed my own training based on all of these different camps and trains of thoughts, based on people's real experiences, based on my ability to read and interpret research, based on my understanding of the human body that came from studying exercise physiology and then physical therapy. So that combination, I think, was really powerful. Just a kind of a broad understanding of what evidence-based practice really is, which is like your own personal experience, the research, and how it applies to a living biological system. And I was able to just very kind of critically and methodically put together a plan that worked for me. But there was a lot of thought involved, and I think that as my career progressed, because getting strong at the beginning is fairly easy. Like anybody will get stronger at the beginning if they just lift a little bit more weights than the previous week, kind of thing, right? But
Right.
eventually, as you accumulate more training years and more experience and more injuries and so on, it becomes a really complex formula that you have to figure out for yourself. Like, if you stop seeing progress, do you increase or do you decrease your training? Did you stop seeing progress because you're not recovering or because you're not training enough?
Mm.
Nobody has the answer, right? It's your body ultimately. And so navigating through that was really difficult, but I think that just my ability to understand things and complex topics in the human body allowed me to continue making progress. Um, then the other thing was a support system. Like I can't tell you how many times I was at the gym throwing the most ridiculous tantrums, throwing my belt around, throwing my shoes around, punching the wall, like punching my head, like I don't know. That's the less kind of glamorous part about sports, that it doesn't get spoken about at all, and it doesn't get shown at all. But I went through it. Like I've had some pretty ridiculous, you know, anger feats at the gym, and pretty ridiculous lows as well, where I like leave the gym crying as if somebody died or whatever, and just having someone around to tell you it's okay, and to wipe your tears and try it again or keep going was extremely powerful. And for me, it was my partner at the time, and a couple of my best friends that were training with me day in and day out. That was really powerful. So you do need a support system, because eventually you are going to doubt yourself. You are. It doesn't matter how confident you are. It doesn't matter, how driven you are, how motivated you are. I've I've experienced that throughout my entire, not only athletic career, but also professional career in business and in school and everything. Like there's some times where I really don't think I can do it. I really don't think I have it in me, and I really, really, really want to quit. So having someone next to you to tell you, hey, let's try it this way, or have you thought about it this way, or don't be so hard on yourself, is extremely powerful. Um, and then it's so that's number two, and then number three would be um trying to stay in neutral as much as possible with your emotions. Like people assign way too much meaning to their emotions and make decisions based on how they're feeling, and they tend to forget that emotions are transient. Like they're so temporary, like I was really depressed yesterday. I spent most of the day yesterday crying on the floor here, legit. And today I woke up and I was like, okay, it was just a moment of vulnerability. It was a moment of sadness. Something was suggestible, something brought something up that made me really upset and really sad. And today I was fine, right? Like I'm not gonna say, oh fuck it, I'm depressed, I'm so sad, I'm never gonna show up to the gym. No, it was just a moment. So I think that's the other part, trying to stay in kind of like a neutral emotional state as much as possible, and not assigning any sort of uh deeper meaning to the emotions that you're feeling. And then just doing the mundane, doing the thing that you have to do. There's a book called Chop Wood, Carry Water,
It's a great book.
that
Yeah.
I love that book. Like it's all ideas that are kind of common sense. Like when you read them, it's like you read them and you're like, yeah, I know this, but the way that the story is told and presented is like, oh, okay, like that is how I should just approach my entire life. Basically, it's like it just takes a lot of repetition and a lot of doing really boring shit over and over and over and over again for you to get somewhere, for you to get the amount of training and of practice and of knowledge and of experience to actually take steps forward. So I would say those four things.
That's incredible. That's super, super valuable. I appreciate you sharing that. And that's a great book. That's actually, my uncle got me that book when I turned 18, and it changed my life. I mean, it's so true. And I think that's another place a lot of people miss, is they just simply overcomplicate things. They think they have to do all these crazy things to succeed. And at the end of the day, like you said, there are a handful of things that you just have to do consistently, and they're very simple and they're basic, but that's what gets you to where you want to go. And
100%.
yeah, and Kobe, I've heard Kobe talk about it too. Kobe Bryant will talk about just like not getting too high, not getting too low, wins, losses, whatever. If you can maintain
Yep.
that mindset of just staying level, that's what's going to take you, because there's so many things in life that we cannot control. And this is
Yep.
something I put out content this week about it. I just ran a 50-mile race on Saturday in San Francisco, and the race got canceled. But my partner and I said, we're not gonna. I don't care how bad the wind is. I don't care how bad the flooding is. We're gonna go run this race, and we're gonna control what we can control. And so we went out and we mapped out our own 50-mile race, and we did it in lieu of the actual race. And again, it just comes down to like, what are you willing to do to succeed, even though life throws curveballs at you and you can't do anything about it.
That's so rad.
Yeah, it was sick. It was crazy.
That's epic.
But I mean, it's
How do
what
you feel? How do you feel after the 50 miles?
I feel okay. The day after I was pretty beat. I think for me, honestly, my feet are a little swollen, my ankles are a little swollen. I'm feeling a little bit of stuff in my right Achilles, so I'm just gonna take it easy there. But I think for me, it was the mental side that really pushed me, and that's what I wanted. That's kind of what I desired. I didn't go after like I'm not an ultra runner by any means. I didn't train for this very specifically. I just wanted to go complete the feat, so I didn't have a goal of pacing, but what it did for me is it took me to a place I wanted to go mentally, and it really allowed me to kind of battle. And yeah, it's just one of those things like that distance, it requires you to really it's a really good metaphor for life. Like you can't sit there and be like, oh my gosh, I've got 27 more miles to go, or I've got X amount left. You really got to be focused on the present moment of where you are right now. And that's going to get you to the end. You can't be looking too far ahead. And so that was like my biggest like mental takeaway, I think, is just being present where you are and just to keep fighting.
I love that. That's powerful.
It was super cool. But I appreciate what you said because I think it's super cool. And what went into your process. I think people will take a lot from that. Really, really the last big thing I want to touch on, again, wanting to be sensitive to your time here, is your passion for education. And this is what I think, again, you've had tremendous success physically, you've had tremendous success in business and all these different things, but your desire to learn and to educate, and then not only to acquire that information, but then to go out and share it and help people with that information. What did that process look like for you? I know you kind of touched on it earlier, as you weren't necessarily the best student early on, but you started to kind of desire or just kind of appreciate or develop this desire to learn. What did that look like for you? And how you kind of went into that world of just wanting to learn and to educate yourself?
Yeah. In talking about the limitations that we set on ourselves, it's funny because I used to think I wasn't a strong student, but only because I was putting that own limitation on myself. I always viewed everybody else as smarter than me. But in reality, everybody else is just like you. Some people might have a better aptitude for learning, some people less, but ultimately we're all made of the same flesh and bones and the same amount and the same neurons and the same brain and the same circuits. So what is stopping me from being at the level of everybody else, right? It was just my own self-limiting beliefs, right? So I had to get my head out of my ass at some point during college when I wasn't doing very well, and it started realizing how far behind I was falling. But ultimately, I really had to dig deep to understand why that was the case. And for me, it was I really wasn't studying something that I was curious about. Like, forget about love, forget about passion, forget about any of that. It was just curiosity is the first step in learning something. Like, you have to be curious
Mm.
on why things are the way that they are. And I was simply not curious about business at that point in time. Now I am extremely curious. Now I want to go back to school and get an MBA. I want to go to Harvard and MBA. But back then, I was just not mature enough to understand how that was going to help me in the future. And I just needed to be studying something that I was curious about, that like made me feel some sort of like spark inside to want to learn and to question things and be skeptical. So when I moved here to the States and I started dabbling on different sports, I developed an eating disorder because I wasn't competing at anything at a high level, so I probably wasn't training that much. I wasn't eating right either. I was probably going out more than I should, and I gained your typical freshman 15 and developed an eating disorder. Was extremely unhappy about the way that I looked and the way I felt and everything. And then on top of that, I was also shamed for feeling that way, right? Because the whole body positivity thing. Oh, you just gotta accept your body the way that it is, accept it the way that it is. And it's like, that is such a foreign concept for me because I've never just accepted anything for how it is, right? If there's something that I don't like, I go and I change it. And so I didn't understand why I was supposed to be complacent about my body. Why was I supposed to just accept it instead of equipping myself with the tools that I needed to make it exactly the way I want it, right? And in that process, yeah, I switched schools and I started studying exercise physiology and started realizing how misleading the world of health and fitness was, and
Mm.
how much help people need because of so much contradictory information. First of all, the amount of information that's out there. Second of all, the amount of contradictory information that is out there. And third of all, the amount of um, people who are writing and sharing information that are not qualified to be doing that.
Yeah.
And I just saw that as an opportunity more than anything. I'm like, okay, I think that I could get into that. I wanted to capitalize on that opportunity. Like, obviously, I wanted to help people understand the health and fitness better because I was very lost at one point, to the point where I developed an eating disorder. And so I was like, okay, I definitely would want to be the person that filters out the shit information that's out there and that brings some level of clarity to people and dispels some of these uh beliefs and myths that are out there. I wanted to be that person. And so that was kind of like what started my journey into taking my education really seriously, because I felt like I had a purpose that was above just the grade. It wasn't about getting straight A's. It wasn't about like graduating with honors. It was about helping people.
Yeah.
And in that process, making money.
That's amazing. And I appreciate you doing that, honestly, not trying to hype you up, but I do think you hit on something that's so true. Like, with social media can be such a positive, but there's so many things that we just have to be careful of. And especially in the fitness industry, the health industry, there's so many people that are putting out information that's just not accurate. It's not true. It doesn't represent a truly healthy like lifestyle or habit. And I appreciate what you do. You've had a lot of success personally, but you really are sharing real factual truths with people that you've learned and spent a lot of time grinding and educating yourself and developing this knowledge to then go out and make a big difference. And I think it's super cool what you're doing. And I hope what you do continues. I know it already is, but continues to inspire others to do the same thing. Cause I think that's how we can really help a lot of people.
Agreed.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I want to wrap this up. I know you've got a lot going on, but I appreciate you coming on the show. This has been an incredible conversation, and I'm super thankful for you. I think the last question I have wrapping this up is, if you could give yourself any advice, all the different experiences, physically, mentally, things that you've gone through to where you are now at a younger age, what is one thing that you've learned along your journey that you think is super valuable that you would just wish you knew earlier?
Oof. Mm, I would say that no one really knows what they're doing. And so for me, it was, comparison is the thief of joy. So for a long time, I always felt like I was so far behind and that I had no chance of ever like catching up with people. But as I got older, I realized that no one really knows what they're doing. Everybody's just scrambling, to try to figure it out, but no one really knows. So it's like, you're not really behind. It's never too late to start, and you have the power to do whatever you want.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. And like I said, I'm super grateful for you and all you're doing. And if I can do anything to ever support or help you, please let us know. And thank you for coming on the show. This has been a really fun episode.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.